Добрый день.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Foreign Ministry, to this press center. Together with us are Russian and foreign journalists at our online briefing. Of course, everyone is now closely looking at Riyadh, where Americans and Russians are talking and organizing a possible future meeting between Russian and American presidents. Just a moment ago, a break was announced, and then the parties are going to resume their talking process. We have a lot of questions regarding this process about the details and stances that each party has. During the negotiations, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that following the negotiation process, communication is planned between Russian foreign minister and media outlets. Therefore, I realize that it's almost impossible, but we have to endure, bear with them for a moment, then you'll get first-hand experience regarding this process. But now, let us go back to our agenda. Let us start with the agenda of Russian Foreign Minister that are upcoming on February 21st, 22nd. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is going to take part in a kick-off meeting in Johannesburg between foreign ministers. It's a landmark event both for Pretoria and the whole African continent. Let me remind you that Africa is going to host a G20 event for the first time in its history. Russian foreign minister is going to give a detailed analysis of the international situation with an emphasis on the root causes of these developments, and specific steps have been outlined on how to overcome destructive phenomena. On the sidelines of this meeting, a whole number of contacts of the minister with interested parties is being worked on. Let us now move to the situation around Ukraine. These days are marking 11 days since the tragic events in downtown Kiev that are known in history as an armed anti-constitutional coup d'etat. On February 18, 2014, allegedly peaceful anti-government manifestations on Euromaidan morphed into forceful actions. Headquarters of the leading party of regions was captured and burned. 2 employees died. The protesters attacked the Berkut militia unit and other law enforcement bodies. Western organizers, sponsors, and orchestrators of those street battles under attractive banners of an allegedly better European life, democracy, human rights, and a combat against corruption mercilessly were pushing the protesters ahead. That's the tactics of a life shield. It was well paid for from abroad, supported, and organized from abroad as well. This is an attack on democracy, not its support. Those mass manifestations, riots were organized to oust the legitimate power in Ukraine. For some reason, the Ukrainian political discourse called this bloody coup, as you might know, the revolution of dignity. That's how it translates. Revoluция гідності in the Ukrainian language. Let's now see what it means. The dictionary of the Ukrainian language gives 2 definitions, and both of them don't have anything in common, neither with the tragedy on Maidan, nor with today's Ukraine. The first definition reads as a set of traits characterizing positive moral qualities. That what dignity stands for according to the dictionary. But what exactly, when we look at those events, was a manifestation of those positive moral qualities? Was it the capture by a riotous mob of governmental buildings? Were those killings of representatives of law enforcement bodies who were unarmed? Maybe the preparedness to sell the country for cookies that were handed out by Victoria Nuland on Euromaidan. Maybe that was the acts towards law enforcement bodies, representatives against whom criminal cases were initiated, who were persecuted. The Kiev regime did not specify what exactly constituted positive moral qualities out of that list, but their promises to investigate the tragedy on Euromaidan and another tragedy in Odessa that happened on May 2nd, 2014, and their promise to not allow impunity and to provide the supremacy of law remained empty words. Let us now look at the second definition of that term, гідність. It means a person's realization of his civic weight, of his civic responsibility. I'm curious how Ukrainians assess the civic responsibility of nationalists who beat and killed those who didn't agree with their ideology on the basis of the non-acceptance on the language and national basis. Where the civic weight of those who seized churches and demolished monuments? Are Ukrainians now proud that it's now prohibited to speak Russian under pretext for this ban has become pretext for denunciation, harassment, and violent actions? What gives Ukrainians out of that list the realization of its civic weight? In the winter of 2013-2014, Ukrainians took the streets because they wanted a better life. There were a lot of changes, but, can you find a spot on Earth where no changes take place? But did they really achieve what they were hoping for? Did they achieve exactly what they were hoping for when they took to the streets on Euromaidan? But the answer is evident. The Euromaidan led to a deep split in society, repressions, and a combat against dissent, rampant nationalism and neo-Nazism, lawlessness, nihilism, and a combat against ethnic manifestation, peaceful manifestations of culture and history. It led to a complete degradation to a social and economic situation in the country. In February 2014, there was still a real chance, despite everything that was happening, for a peaceful settlement of the crisis in Ukraine, but there was one prerequisite needed, the implementation of the agreement between the authorities and the opposition. It was signed, let me remind you, on February 21st, 2014. And it was done with assistance. Do you remember who assisted this process? It was Germany, France, and Poland. Let us now look what these countries are thinking now with regard to what's happening in Ukraine. How does it correlate with the fact that they actually lied to the people of Ukraine? How they lied, in particular Germany and France, how they have been lying for all these 7 years after they signed the Minsk Accord, and how they're lying now to the people of Ukraine by telling them that the victory is not far ahead. And the people of Ukraine will certainly prevail, but in fact they realize that this war is being waged by the West against the Ukraine itself. But it didn't happen then, as you remember, and there was no real chance. The West didn't give any chance to the people of Ukraine in February 2014. That agreement between the authorities and the opposition was dismissed by the so-called victors of this revolution of dignity. It was just ignored as an obstacle towards governmental posts. It was violated during the first hours after the agreement had been signed. It was taken to the people as a testament to the surrender by the authorities, but that did not happen. The Westerners, including their intermediaries, instead of calling upon nationalists to adhere by the provisions of the agreement, just concluded that the change in power was made. The anti-Russian, Russophobic, Russian policies were supported, and the conditions were formed for what will later be called the Ukrainian crisis that took many years and maimed destinies of different peoples. Now let us move on to the crimes of the Kiev regime. Back then, the Ukrainian militants received indulgence from allegedly enlightened Western pseudo-democracies. Now they continue their terror against civilian population and civilian infrastructure of the Russian regions. From February 12th to February 13th, targeted drone strikes of the AFU on the civilian transport and infrastructure in the Belgorod region killed 6 people and injured at least 8 people. We talk about it each time at our briefing, but at the Munich Security Conference, when they allegedly talk about the policy of security, we listened to a representative of the European Union, and he said that Russian civilians allegedly don't suffer. They don't get killed. They don't get maimed, allegedly. I refuse to believe what I've heard, that it was not a fake news, but we double-checked it and double-checked it again. We saw footage of that conference, and we realized that those people were just, it was just ludicrous. They had all the names, family names, first names, birth dates, with regard to those people who have fallen victims to the Kiev regime, but that reiterate at all those international platforms that is not happening, that nothing of that sort happened in the town of Bucha. No one has given a single first or last name, not a single date of birth, hasn't demonstrated a single photograph of those people who allegedly fell victims to the Russian troops. For each person who fell victim to the Russian regime, we say we have all the data, we have all the information to prove them wrong. On February 12th, different DPR settlements became subjected to Ukro-Nazi strikes. 1 person died and at least 15 people were injured, including a teenager born in 2006. Bannerites are hunting for passenger buses. On February 12th and 13th, a city bus and 2 minibuses were hit in the Nikitovsky rayon of Gorlovka in the DPR. On February 14th, on the Pologi-Chapaevka road in the Zaporozhye region, a strike was conducted on the Ukrainian drone. The commuter bus, the driver was shell-shocked. On February 16th, a drone strike hit Slavansk on Kuban in the Krasnodarsky Krai, and a 4-year-old girl was seriously injured. Russian courts continue to give sentences to Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for their war crimes. Those who are militants of the 22nd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the AFU, Zavatsky, Fordolenko, Taran, and Savakis were accused of their crimes of committing terrorist acts against military civilian population. To 13.5 years was sentenced Georgian mercenary Gela Khordzavanidze. He was declared internationally wanted. A criminal case was initiated with regard to a British legionnaire, Mr. Garrett, who fought from January 2015 to December 2017 in the neo-Nazi Azov unit. Let me remind you that it's been recognized as a terrorist organization and has been prohibited in the Russian Federation. From February 22nd to November 2024, he fought in the International Legion. Investigative bodies in Russia continue their work to bring Ukro-Nazis and foreign mercenaries to justice for the war crimes and other atrocities. Now let us move on to what will certainly be silence, and we realize that all those European human rights activists, the so-called diplomats and representatives of international organizations. Now let's talk about inhumane treatment of Russian prisoners of war. The Investigative Committee of Russia has recorded the further facts of an inhumane treatment on the side of Ukrainian of Russian prisoners of war by Ukrainian neo-Nazis in violation of international humanitarian law. One of the war-wounded fighters was injured in the Kharkov detention center after being captured. He was forced to sign documents discrediting Russian armed forces. He was forced to join the ranks of territorial defense of Ukraine. Another prisoners of war, another serviceman of ours, was being tortured and kept in a pit by Ukrainian forces. He was forced to give information about the Russian army. A criminal case was initiated on charges of using prohibited methods and means in armed conflict. Now, in illegal crossing of the Russian border by foreign journalists, a criminal case was initiated against Spanish journalist Alberto Rojas, working for El Mundo newspaper. The law enforcement bodies have recorded that in February this year, he, together with neo-Banderite formations, illegally crossed the Russian border in the direction of the Sudzha district of the Kursk region, where he met with Banderites from the 47th Brigade of the AFU. That's not the first time when foreign journalists illegally cross the Russian border to tell about quote-unquote feats of the army of Zelensky. Of course, they violate Russian laws, which is now being discussed by investigative committee and the law enforcement bodies, but of course they also violate the code of journalist ethics because they are disseminating propaganda materials. Moreover, they violate the common human moral qualities because they propagate violation and violence. Well, we also see a nervous, almost panicky reaction of the West to Russian-American contacts. The West is surprised. How can that be? Well, it can. Russian-American contacts on top and high levels provoke a nervous reaction among Euro-Atlantic Russophobes. We see an unprecedented phenomenon in international relations. We see how they impose their own participation in the negotiation process. We're talking about the British and the European friends of the criminal regime of Mr. Zelensky. They demonstrate their inability to go beyond their own primitive attitudes to orchestrating the war with Russia till the last Ukrainian. You see, the European Commissioner on Defense, Mr. Kubilus, continues to state, and I cite him, that a just world is not possible without giving more power to Ukraine. Just look at this country, look at the Ukraine. I'm now talking to European commissioners. Look what you've done to this country, to the people of this country. What power are you talking about? How can you increase it even? They have been immersed in Russophobia, blatant Russophobia. Madame Callas went to the extent that she started vindicating AFU militants. In her warped imagination, they don't kill peaceful Russian women and children. Every briefing we talk about it. Our regions, heads of our regions, public institutions, and Commissioner for Human Rights and Children's Rights regularly report on atrocities committed by AFU militants. Those reports are being published. As for press conferences, we hear ambassadors talk about it and give regular reports. And they still don't get the information, the news. They all have the data. They're just lying. They have to justify themselves in the eyes of their own citizens and vindicate their own failure, the failure of their own policies. That's why they are prepared to abet the killings of Ukrainian citizens. They are ready to do that by supplying them with weapons and lie to their own people. Every time we will highlight those fakes and debunk them and give answers against the backdrop of a rapidly changing situation. Such a flawed logic of thinking looks like something characterized as despair, anger, and weakness. They can try all they want to prolong the agony of the Kiev junta. They will not succeed.
Because they fell victims of deceit and aggression that the Westerners involved them in, under the mottos of democracy, economic prosperity, and so on and so forth. Sooner or later, all of them will have to take responsibility for what they've done. The complicity with the modern Ukrainian Banderovics may echo to many European elites as accomplices of bloody crimes of the neo-Nazi regime that they had nurtured. More attempts to draw parallels between Nazi Germany and the USSR are pitiful, miserable, and groundless. I'll remind you, it was the USSR who defeated Nazism. It is the USSR liberated its territory and then went on and liberated Europe. They do it out of fear. The US and NATO are afraid of unavoidable collapse of the Ukrainian Nazis. They are afraid of responsibility before their own peoples, because they left their people and people of Ukraine, and on February 12th, the Verkhovna Rada passed a law to establish in Ukraine the so-called National Prayer Day on February 24th. According to the concept note, I quote, the common prayer will defend Ukraine and those who continue fighting on the battlefield, and will testify to spiritual unification, note, unification of the Ukrainian nation, and a symbol of faith in victory. Everything is here. What kind of unification are we talking about when, on the behest of Zelensky, and the Westerners are behind him, and the Ukrainian Orthodoxy is damaged? We see that churches are seized in monasteries. We see talk show and culinary TV shows. It is preposterous. They turn churches into something strange. They make people leave the churches. They persecute the clergy. They make them swear allegiance to the schismatics. What kind of unification are we talking about? But if people cannot find common ground, then the state has to interfere and to help those who cannot coexist with each other and find a way for the settlement. But we have an opposite situation. People in Ukraine have lived peacefully, and the Orthodox people did anyway. And to take one more step to sabotage between Ukraine, Russia, Russians and Ukrainians, there was an order to persecute the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They did everything. They came up with a schism. They came up how to seize churches, monasteries, how to incite the believers against each other. And now it turns out there's a day for a common prayer. But there's one more aspect. We're talking about the prayer for the Ukrainian armed forces that continues terror against civilians, both of Russia and Ukraine. This is a prayer for the Nazi evil. This is literally attempt to make the evil something sacred. This step looks not even hypocritical. It only testifies to the fact that this junta see religion as a political tool. And of course, there's fight with history, with monument and memory in Ukraine. According to the media, in the city of Nikolaev, Ukrainian Nazis destroyed monuments to the hero and leader of the local underground unit, Viktor Lagin. He was shot down by Nazis in July 1943, and his monument was shut down by the Ukrainian Nazis in 2020. That's what the Ukrainian regime do with the acquiescence of their Western masters. This acquiescence is only the second part, and the first part was direct order. These facts yet again confirm the relevance of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine and to remove threats coming from its territory. As our leadership said multiple times, all the aims of the special military operation will be achieved. The Munich conference on security shocked everyone. And those in the first place who wanted to have another holiday of Russophobia. That's what the conference turned into in the recent years, because they didn't talk about security. They talked about aggression and how to fuel the war, how to increase conflicts, how to incite people against each other so that people forget about peace for many years. The 61st Munich Conference on Security demonstrated something that we talked about long ago. The Western world ceased to claim to be an example. They are not an example. They even don't claim to be an example of security or democracy. Nothing close. The event aimed, according to the organizers, to analyze trends and to articulate ideas of Euro-Atlantic security policy. Was reduced to a squabble between two coasts of the Atlantic. All of this went along with the traditional Russophobe rhetoric. Any constructive ideas in terms of architecture of security in Europe and in the world in general weren't there. They didn't went there for this purpose. The same old story. About ostensible Russian threat to the EU, to NATO, was continued. They said about hegemony that even if they try to continue talking about hegemony, they have to make a remark that it's in death pains. Those are not recipes for peace. Those are recipes for disaster. What should they talk about instead? First of all, what mistakes did they make? First of all, they should have analyzed their policy, their criminal policy, and talk about rectifying their mistakes. But no, they didn't interested in that. They thought what spending they can cut down on to finance to continue to continue support the war. They were words of the European sponsors to the Kiev regime about their unwavering support. With lack of ideas about ways out of the crisis of European security, the participants of the conference stood and applauded to Zelensky. This is abuse of Ukrainian people. It's not about Russia. They just disregard people of Ukraine when they say that Zelensky can claim leadership in the emergence of the European army. It's what he said, and European leaders supported him. Now Ukrainians can become part of the army since 18 years old. What are they? We understand what these young people are going to do in their Ukrainian armed forces. They are not going to do anything in the general staff. They are not going to deal with IT issues. They won't deal with drones. They will be cannon fodder and shields for Zelensky. In the year of the 18th anniversary of victory, the Munich Security Conference was marked with honoring former and current Nazis. It's getting kind of tradition. The leader of the Munich conference, Heusgen, said that the event was somewhat of a European nightmare for Europe. This was a direct quote. This begs the question: when are you going to sober up? When are you going to come round there in Western Europe from your nightmare? The problem is not in the conference, but in Western Europe itself. It cannot soberly evaluate the reality. It lives in their own made-up narratives instead of increasing welfare of their citizens. They prepare for war with Russia. Instead of social and economic problems and finding solutions to them, they build up military budget. Instead of fighting legal migration, crime, terrorism, they hunt Russian spies. The Western Europe is something to make fun of by the rest of the world. They have nothing to do with Russia, and they continue their ideas that the threat come from Russia. Instead of free speech, they introduce restrictions against alternative sources of information. They block spread of information as such. And in this space, they find themselves in another nightmare. Probably they should check and let some fresh air in and to look what's going on. Given the statements of majority of European politicians, they are not going to come round from the Russophobe political fever. And as a confirmation, on February 15th in Munich, on the sidelines of the conference, the so-called G7 had contacts. Following this meeting, they against threatened Russia. Essentially, they said that if G7, I mean the group of these countries, see a lack of goodwill regarding negotiations in the context, as they said, an end to the war against Ukraine, then they'll try and make Russia, quote, impose further costs on Russia, including through caps on carbons. I have one question. It is within G7, they talked that it's not time for negotiations, that the situation does not beg situation. Wasn't it Blinken and high representatives for foreign policy of the EU? wasn't that leaders of the foreign ministries of the countries that formed G7. It's not. It's some kind of a circus, and I don't want to offend circus. We defined many times the political policy of the current G7. It ceased being an association to align positions on key global issues and became a body to coordinate measures to put pressure on countries deemed unwanted. They stain their reputation with unflattering actions and decisions. It's naive to think that this get-together decides anything given in international realities. This is an outdated format and it completely lost their authority. They stained their reputation. No constructive role of G7 in development and stabilization can be mentioned, or probably they can give other examples. So where are the results of their work besides Russophobe words and nationalist or with the spirit of hatred statements against those that they call their enemies or opponents? There's nothing. Russia made an unequivocal decision in favor of real mechanism of global management. I'm talking first of all about BRICS and SCO. They represent the leading centers of economic growth and political influence, given an objective reality of an emerging multipolar world order. Here when we see real work about the tool of aggression and destructive policy about US aid. We took notice that as Washington debunked and stop the foreign aid, more and more countries realize the flattering reality of the tools of the so-called soft power. They were the tools even not of American foreign policy, but the maintaining of the narratives of American ultra-liberals, and as well as a tool to interfere into internal affairs of other countries to pursue policy needed to American Democrats, and to receive dividends within the country. There's an active discussion among countries friendly to us. Recently, the leadership of Kyrgyzstan supported the idea to shut down the Radio Svoboda. They accused its local office in spreading disinformation and manipulation of news. The Parliament of Kazakhstan also called for audit of the US aid on the territory of Republic for the purpose of financing a number of harmful projects, from attempts to impose the people with neoliberal values to interference into internal policy. One more time, Russia said that the American programs have more risks than aid itself. That's why we weren't surprised in regards to these messages. They only confirmed what we had been talking about for many years, including for those countries who doubted or weren't sure. We prepare to continue our joint efforts to prevent attempts to undermine stability and security on our common space. A very important document of Russia. Countering extremism is getting a special sphere in the international cooperation. This can be explained by the growing problem of radicalization of citizens. that happens because of the spread of poisonous ideas and practices that facilitate incitement of religious and ethnic.
Such radical ideologies are not born in a vacuum. Unfortunately, they thrive also due to the cynical policies of a number of countries that are waging information wars, provoking armed conflicts, while instigating coup d'etats for their own selfish purposes. In such conditions, these anti-extremist resilience of the most states depends primarily on their own capacities, taking into account nuances of national context. We are convinced that the protection from extremist risks is one of the main tasks for ensuring the stable and independent existence in each country. While building our own development trajectories is a pivotal condition for the formation of multipolar, fair world order. In this connection, Russia intends to defend the right of any state to independently assess internal and external threats and to determine its respective national priorities and approaches to combat not only violent but also ideological prerequisites of terrorism and extremism. By Decree number 1124 of the President of Russia, an updated strategy for countering extremism in Russia was approved. So we will send a link to this briefing. We would like to draw attention that this document, previous strategy was valid till 2025, was received a more expanded, comprehensive character. The strategy takes into account all new trends in anti-extremist work and have emerged against the background of special military operation and hybrid war against our country. The text incorporates a number of provisions of the concept of foreign policy of Russia, which further reinforces foreign policy, significantly adjusts the conceptual body of the document, clarifies the levels and sources of extremist threats, and primarily the role of the state and competent authorities with the system of countering extremism has taken clearly defined nature against extremist manifestations. This document enshrines one of the key Russian positions of the inadmissibility of attempts by foreign interference in the internal affairs of states and the use of terrorist groups and other extremist forces for geopolitical purposes. Emphasis has been placed on the need to combat the spread of any terrorist extremist ideology, including the neo-Nazi one. The strategy also accumulated progressive Russian experience in prevention and avoidance of radicalization, primarily among young people, migrants, persons serving prison sentences, and other social categories most susceptible to extremist ideas. A set of measures has been approved to suppress the use of information technologies, including Internet. Targeted attention has been given to neutralizing the negative influence of foreign intelligence services, NGOs, foreign agents aimed at provoking attempts to instigate color revolutions of so-called color revolutions in Russia. We invite interested international partners to study carefully Russian successful experience in combating extremism, which has been formed thanks to many years of targeted comprehensive work with the participation of all Russian society, has a truly high civil immunity against any extremist threats. And our recently Mr. Barrow thanks the United States for liberating his country from Nazis and call for greatness together. He traditionally forgot to mention the USSR contribution to the liberation of France. I quote Mr. Barrow, both Europe and France has never been greater than when they fought for the freedom together with the United States. This is the story of Lafayette. This is the story of liberation of France by American soldiers. We celebrated the 80th anniversary of the liberation of France this year, said French minister. We will stand with the US, ensuring shared greatness and pursuing freedom around the world. End of quote. I'm not going to say about our competition with France for primacy as who contributed more to the independence of North American United States. But since the Marquis de Lafayette has been mentioned, we cannot but refrain from quoting the words addressed to him in the spring of 1779 by Washington, Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. We are much grateful to learn from a reliable source that the request and proposal of Great Britain to the Russian Empress have been rejected with contempt. End of quote. Washington, noting Catherine II's resolute refusal to conclude any treaty of alliance with Great Britain, emphasized that the imperial government has motivated its position in expression bearing the stamp of respect for the right of mankind. End of quote. And this is briefly about the US. One could go into more detail about Abraham Lincoln's support of Russian squadron forces on the west and east coast during the American Civil War. They were quite instrumental in preventing British and French intervention on the side of the southern states. But I would talk about this next time if someone is willing to say something in distortion. Today we would focus on France. I understand that among those words I just mentioned, Jean-Louis Marot even doesn't understand them. But I would focus quite in detail and would try to use simple words in order to bring this into his mind. I would like to comment on his statement about liberation and greatness. The light landing in Normandy in 1944 undoubtedly became a turning point in liberation of France from the Nazis' operation, with one nuance. We cannot regard the Overlord operation in isolation from the events of the Soviet-German front, where the same June began perhaps the largest battle of the Second World War, the Bagration operation and liberation of Belarus. In France, already in 1940, do you know, in Foreign Ministry of France, Russian immigrants created the first resistance group known as Museum of Men. It was led by Mr. Levitsky and Mr. Wilde. In 1943, the Central Committee of the Soviet POVs in France was established, headed by Red Army Senior Lieutenant Mark Slobodinsky and a French communist son of Russian immigrants, Boris Martin, known as Colonel Larouche. Near the French town Thiel for the legendary Women's Partisan Unit Rodin. It was created by two natives of Soviet Belarus, Lisovets and Fritzon. In the vicinity of city of Lans, fighters of Vasily Vasilyevich Porik fought against the enemy. He was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of Soviet Union, and in France acted the 1st Soviet Partisan Regiment. Do they know about this? I mean, the current Foreign Minister of France? Of course not. They had to learn the history of their own country without feeding these narratives. I hope that Mr. Barrot will not refuse the words of the leader of Free France, Charles de Gaulle, who said in 1944, I quote, "The French know that it was Soviet Russia that played the main role in their liberation." Or the current leadership are going to reject Charles de Gaulle as well. I would like to remind them why he said this. He said this under the impression of what he had seen in Stalingrad earlier, and most of the French shared the opinion until they became victims of this so approach to the history, when you can pick up or cherry pick in what you would like to have, just replacing them with some notes or narratives. Until now, several streets in France are named by the names of the cities which became the symbols of the Second World War. Probably the Foreign Minister of France, Jean-Noël Barrot, probably buys a reference book, reads something to get more information about the history of his own people and the country. The liberation of capital Paris was not a priority for the American commander Eisenhower in 1944. Paris was liberated with small forces, and in short time, first the resistance, whose core was made up with the communists and former Soviet prisoners of war, revolted. Not everyone remembers this, but I will remind no less than 6 partisan groups composed of Soviet POWs and Russian immigrants participated in liberation of Paris. A group under Captain Steverov held Anier's bridge for 24 hours, preventing German tanks from entering the city. Shame on current leadership forgetting this heroism. A group of immigrants under Lev Savinkov occupied the building of the Soviet embassy and raised a red flag over it. It then gave de Gaulle the right to declare that Paris itself found the freedom and was liberated by its own people. And only then the 4th Infantry Division of the USA and French 2nd Armored Division came in to the aid of the rebels. The first to enter Paris were the Spanish military. They also accepted the surrender of the German commander. Such a revenge for Madrid. Then the common efforts, fascism really didn't pass, but today, through the efforts of Free Europe, it has returned to the guise of neo-Nazism. Paris, which had won its own freedom, was liberated with the support of the whole struggling France. Unlike the United States and Great Britain, the USSR immediately believed in the future of the Free France headed by General de Gaulle and established close cooperation with him. By his order, the legendary air regiment Normandy Neman was established, which became a vivid symbol of the Soviet-French brotherhood in arms. It also worth recalling the significant contribution of native of Russia and captured Soviet citizens. I would recommend the French Minister of Foreign Affairs to get acquainted with the article Soviet Citizens and Russian Immigrants in the French Resistance Movement by Alexei Meshkov, Russian ambassador to France, published in December 2024 in the French magazine Histoire Magazine. I understand for the current level of the French diplomacy, this text is very difficult, but you should make efforts if you are about to say something to this end. It is difficult to agree with Barrot's assertion that both Europe and France have never been greater than when they fought for freedom together with the United States. Americans have never viewed the Europeans as truly equal allies and partners. There has always been an inversely proportional relationship between France's true greatness and rapprochement with the United States. This was again well understood by de Gaulle, who saw cooperation with Russia as a prerequisite for this country's greatness. And Barrot, if he has anything to thank for France's greatness after World War II, it is the leader of the USSR, Joseph Stalin. It is to him that the Fourth Republic owns its status as the victor. The history of France knows leaders capable of great deeds for the national interest of their countries, and there are different assessments. Now we don't have any illusions about the current ones. But what is clear, no matter we take what is said by the French foreign minister, it is the shame for the French people because they don't know the history of their country. But we would like to stand by for the protection of the French history. Another important event is the Western Carpathian Offensive Operation. On January 12, the Western Carpathian Strategic Offensive Operation began with the aim of defeating the German forces and providing access to Ostrava industrial region. The Czech industry, famous for gun factories, were faithfully producing their products for the needs of Wehrmacht. The troops of the 4th Ukrainian Front, commanded by General Ivan Petrov, supported with the main forces of the 2nd Ukrainian Front, commanded by Marshal Malinovsky. Of course, they don't like to remember this in Prague, but the 1st Army Corps of Czechoslovakia took part also together with the Soviet troops. The Soviet troops were opposed by German Army Group A, which included units of 17th Army, the 1st Hungarian Army. During the week of the Soviet troops managed to advance up to 80 kilometers. They liberated Prestov and Koshets. By the February 18, the troops of the 4th Ukrainian Front went on the defensive, successfully completing the active phase of the operation, and the troops of the 2nd Ukrainian Front continued offensive operation until mid-March, forcing the Gron River. The success of the 4th Ukrainian Front offensive in the most difficult winter conditions in mountainous terrain with a minimal advantage in forces over the well-fortified enemy can be compared only with the legendary crossing of Field Marshal Suvorov through the Alps at the end of the 18th century. This is, without any exaggeration, is a true heroism, an example of the military art of fighting, not in numbers but in skill. The Western Carpathian operation became an important stage in delivering a decisive blow to the German forces in Central Europe. As a result, Soviets advanced 170 to 300 kilometers to the west, liberated some parts of Poland and Czechoslovakia. For the courage of heroism shown in battlefields, many units and formations were awarded orders, and 42 formations and units were given honorary names. Another important on February 21st is the International Mother Tongue Day, established by decision of UNESCO and celebrated to draw attention to the needs of maintaining and promoting linguistic and cultural diversity. Russia is actively promoting the experience and preserving indigenous languages, including on the UNESCO platform. Our country is a leader in terms of contributing to International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Our country has organized major international conferences on the support of native languages and the use of information technologies. The sixth International Conference, Information and Communication in Digital Age, Explicit and Implicit Influence, was devoted to that and held in Khanty-Mansiysk. The second high-level international conference, World Treasure of Mother Tongues, in St. Petersburg, The EBO attended by 200 experts from 40 countries. Considerable attention is paid to introduction of computer speech recognition tools and creation of new funds for minority languages, which is necessary for their full-fledged existence in digital environment. The Information for All Committee of the Commission of the Russian Federation for UNESCO has been implemented. My mother tongue program, which has covered more than 20 languages in Russia. 3 almanacs on best practices were published. Days and weeks of languages and literatures of the indigenous people of Russia are organized with the Commission assistance. The celebration of Day of Finno-Ugric literature held in Khanty-Mansiysk. And our country is prepared to share its experience with all interested partners and intends to adopt the best practices.
February 23rd, our country is celebrating the Defender of the Fatherland Day. It's especially relevant that this remarkable date is especially relevant because our president declared the current year in the Russian Federation the Defender of the Fatherland year to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War, 1941-1945. The thematic substance of this year reflects the priorities of the current Russia, namely patriotism, the continuity of generations, and the respect towards the defenders of the fatherland. I'll remind you that for the first time they were celebrating on February 23rd, 1919. It was time to coincide with the glorious victories of parts of the Red Army that defended the fatherland from foreign occupation. In 1946, after the Second World War, it received a new title, the Soviet Army and Navy Day. The Russian Federation continued the proud tradition by preserving original meaning of this date. The remarkable date was established pursuant to the federal law on days of military glory and memorable dates of March 13th, 1995. The Defender of the Fatherland Day reminds us of a glorious military past of our country. We pay homage to military feat of all who fought for our fatherland in different historic epochs, as well as to current heroes, to those who have taken up arms to defend Russia and on a daily basis display heroism, a genuine bravery in the area of the special military operation. On February 26th at 5 p.m. at the Rudomino All Russia Literature Library for Russian Literature, with the help of the Embassy of Pakistan, a ceremony will be held in honor of the publication in the Russian language of a collection of stories of a prominent Pakistani writer, Sadat Manto. He's a recognized master of short stories who worked in the first half of the 20th centuries, and his works represent a valuable literary legacy. They have been translated into dozens of languages and are popular across the globe. Now they're available in the Russian language. That's not the first book that has been published in the Russian language, published with the help of the Embassy of Pakistan in Russia. Earlier in 2022, a collection of poems by a great Pakistani poet Faiz came out. We are convinced that a seasoned Russian reader would appreciate these works of outstanding Pakistani authors, and I am ready to answer your question. Do we have Международная жизнь, International Life, with us? Yes, good afternoon. The other day, the head of Hungarian Foreign Ministry, Peter Szijjártó, said that currently Europe is uniting its forces who do not want a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian conflict. How would you comment on this? Well, this is in tune with our assessment. That is true. Some European political elites went berserk. They dismissed all the decencies and openly expressed their rejections about possible outlines for substantial conversation on how to settle the Ukrainian crisis using diplomatic means. Well, they are being torn from the hate and their vicious, malign attempts and attitudes. It runs counter to genuine interests of the whole European continent. It's another testament to the fact that the European Union is driven not by humanism or striving to end the suffering of people. It's driven by a desire to prolong the conflict, so that to use the situation to put pressure on Russia and to justify further attempts to inflict a strategic defeat on our country. Well, those are not genuine Europeans. How can they be considered as patriots of the common European space? Well, they cannot. They are just intermediaries and provocateurs. The current political discourse of the collective West shows that the current European leadership sees in the continuation of hostilities in Ukraine its own salvation from an ultimate political bankruptcy and from a slide into the sidelines of international processes from what once was a very prestigious union. They could formulate a peaceful agenda that could be their salvation. That's the road into the right direction. Well, they have committed some criminal errors. At the behest of former White House leaders, they reached a deadlock, a dead end. But it's now high time to see what they have done. They can suggest some constructive ideas, but instead of this, they're crying out that that Russia is to blame for everything, and they are continuing to defend neo-Nazis and fascists in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we have Ria Novosti with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova. My name is Cristina Rodriguez. I have just one question today for you. Moldavian authorities talked about their intention to terminate the activities of the Russian Center for Science and Culture in Chisinau. How legitimate is this decision? How would Moscow react to such actions by the Moldavian authorities? I don't know if media outlets have familiarized themselves with this, but our colleagues said that the first morning session has come to its end, and now they have moved on to the luncheon. Just for you to understand, because I receive a deluge of questions. So the question was regarding the Center for Science and Culture in Chisinau. Is that right? Did I understand that correctly? Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the clarification. Well, that is true. On February 13th, the official Chisinau declared about its intention to denounce the Russian-Moldavian intergovernmental agreement from 1998 on cultural centers. It was demonstrated as a reply to a violation of an Moldavian drones. They are trying to say that these are of Russian origins. The consequence should be the closure of the Russian Center for Science and Culture in Chisinau. What's our take on this? We assess this decision as another manifestation of the anti-Russian course pursued by the Moldavian authorities. And it's an evil act towards the Moldovan people themselves, because the consequences will first and foremost affect the residents of Moldova itself, because they use the Russian language and they are part of the Russian culture. I'm just going to give you some numbers. 80% of Moldovans speak the Russian language. According to the population census held in 2024, it's a mother tongue for 11.1%. At the same time, despite the efforts of the authorities to Russify the country, since the last census held in 2014, this indicator has only increased by 12%. If you add to this the language situation in Transnistria, the numbers will be even higher. The Russian education is still popular, and this the Russian House, the Russian Senate, gives such an opportunity. These opportunities are popular, but that's not the only reason. Citizens in many countries ask for opportunities um, to access the Russian education programs. But who in the current Chisinau is interested in this opinion? They consider Moldovans to be Romanians. The decision to denunciate the agreement provoked a very wide negative publicity in Moldova. On February 15th, there was a protest held before the Foreign Ministry building. The participants requested to preserve the Russian center. As of today, the Russian center continues to work. There has been no written notice about the termination of the agreement from the Moldovan side. If that happens, the agreement is going to be in effect till mid-2026. We hope that common sense and respect towards Moldovan people will prevail in Chisinau, and I hope that the authorities will abstain from reckless measures. Let us move on. Do we have China Media Corporation with us? Colleagues, Media Corporation, China. Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. I have the same question that many colleagues have with regard to negotiations that now take place in Saudi Arabia. I would like to specify what expectations the Russian side has. I would like to note also that China has repeatedly. I'm sorry. I cannot tell you how many messages I'm getting from CNN journalists. Can somebody tell them that we are now holding our briefing? I understand that they think they're exceptional, but not to the extent that they think they are. Please convey my words to them, to CNN journalists. We're having a briefing right now, so I can't answer that question. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I think that CNN journalists have the same question right now. Well, they can connect to our briefing broadcast. Nobody is preventing them from doing that. Can you please repeat your question? I was asking you about the concrete expectations that China has expressed its readiness to mediate the conflict, the peace progress. We value the efforts of China and other countries who have initiated and worked out political and diplomatic formats and have suggested ways and ideas on how to settle and regulate the Ukrainian conflict. It has become history already. It is very important. That is exactly what will become a part of the historical process that speaks in favor of the fact that these countries would like to play a more important role in global affairs, that it's not in vain that they are present in international organizations and deal with international security and stability. It's not in vain that they declare themselves to be responsible global players. That is their confirmed reputation. NATO and the European Union have a different reputation that has also become a part of history. Now to the negotiations. Let me remind you that on February 12th, Russian American presidents said it was important to establish the relations and cooperation on the Ukrainian crisis and a long-term agreement that can be only reached on the table of negotiations. Vladimir Putin said it is important to eradicate the root causes of the conflict. The main one is the expansion of NATO and violation of Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. Without eradicating fully these root causes, the settlement would not be possible. Otherwise, they would resume their unlawful activities. It's not acceptable to us. American President Donald Trump said, listened to our stance. What the conclusions will be, that only time will show. We see the determination of his administration towards a serious discussion of many problems that have accumulated in Russian-American relations on the international agenda. But one should say that these problems have accumulated only because the previous U.S. administration created them themselves. Moscow is carefully following statements of Washington on the crisis settlement. We will analyze concrete suggestions with this regard. Let's now wait for concrete assessments that will be given in Riyadh by the Russian delegation, as was announced by me. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will talk to the media later. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we have Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, we are here. That's good. You've just referred to President's statement on the results of the negotiation with Trump. NATO expansion was mentioned as one of the conditions that, namely that the Ukraine will not join NATO is one of the NATO is one of the conditions that our president opposes. Do we need any legal instrument? Do we have to write it down in laws? NATO membership of Ukraine is not accessible. It will lead to catastrophic consequences for Europe. One has to note, though, that there is the alliance has to disavow the Bucharest agreements that were signed back in 1999. Otherwise, this problem will further poison the atmosphere on the European continent. The conceptual position of the Russian Federation regarding the Ukrainian conflict in NATO has been formulated unambiguously by the Russian president. Please familiarize yourself with this statement of the Russian president that was given in June 2024 at the Russian Foreign Ministry. The proposition of a neutral, non-bloc, non-nuclear status was enshrined in the 1990 Declaration on the Ukrainian state sovereignty. It draws significant attention for everyone, so let me give you a real citation quote. The Ukrainian SR solemnly declares its intention of becoming a permanently neutral state that does not participate in military blocs and adheres to 3 nuclear-free principles: not to accept, not to produce, and not to purchase nuclear weapons. In August 1991, the Verkhovnaya Rada adopted the act of declaring the independence of Ukraine, which enshrined inviolability of the provisions of this declaration, and the link to this act is contained in the preamble of the current constitution of the country. Ukraine needs to go back to the origin of its own statehood, and it should finally start following the spirit and the letter of the documents that were at the basis of its legal foundation. That's the best guarantee of its security. Neither NATO membership, nor the attempts to gain it, nor agreements with allied countries of the alliance can give this security to the country. Well, they should be closer to the reality and to their own documents. Thank you very much, Madam Zakharova. We have the second question regarding potential peaceful agreement to settle the Ukrainian conflict. Will the lifting of sanctions against the Russian Federation become a part of such a peace agreement, rather? Can you repeat your question, please? Will lifting of sanctions against the Russian Federation become a part of the peace agreement to settle the Ukrainian conflict? Well, we have given a common, full picture, general picture as far as our approaches go. As for details, those will be commented on by those who are authorized to be involved in such negotiations. Thank you very much. More on that topic, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has repeatedly commented on the issue, and we will include links to his statements in the transcript of today's briefing. He has repeatedly answered similar questions, so we will refresh his statements in our memory. Do we have Lenta Ru with us?
Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I have two questions. The first question, you mentioned the words of Mr. Hozgin about a nightmare for Europe. So the question in this regard is the following. He talked about a nightmare for Europe in regards to the position of the Donald Trump administration on Ukraine. How does Russian MFA see this statement, given the information that Hozgin have property in the U.S. When he was the head of the Munich Security Conference? You know, I think that what we saw, his tears and this is a natural outcome, natural result of internal anger and ideology of hating people that he promoted. And he was Russophobic. If you look at his statements, and all of them are available on the internet, I even have a list of those statements. He lived by some special sort of hatred against our country. Those were not objective evaluations. It was not the ideology or narratives that share sharing ideas of political movements. He always talked terrible things about our country. And it was clear that it was hatred that appeared in a particular historic moment, not in relation to some particular events, but it's just Russophobia and nationalism. Probably it is fueled by some historic roots. And he was not shy about it. He highlighted it. So the Munich conference that took place recently, where all the participants went crazy, this was a word that he deserved. He led this ship that faced iceberg or rocks. It's up to them to decide, but it happened because they didn't want to see the reality. I have an impression that they looked at photos and thought that it was a window. I have this kind of feeling. And when they needed some fresh air, they didn't get it. They suffocated because it was not a window. It was a picture that they painted themselves, and they preyed on it. Remember how many times Russian representatives talked about necessity to see the realities while addressing our Western colleagues, European colleagues, because they tricked themselves and their nations, even now in the year of the 18th anniversary of victory, they continue these terrible anti-historic narratives. They compare our country with the Third Reich. They humiliate the Soviet people and the achievements of the Red Army. They stress wrong things in the history, so they continue to harbor those illusions. Whether these are illusions or of fever of an ill person, probably we have to address those questions to their nations, to their countries. You ask whether his position is biased because of some political affiliation. It's difficult to tell. I find it difficult to tell. But I think this is an internal nationalist disease that guided him. It's stronger than some kind of financial interest, because to talk about our country and people with such hatred by a person who live in a country that historically, unfortunately, harmed our country and made our people suffer a lot. And he continued this course of suffering, continued his course. This is kind of an illness of the ideology of hating people. Why we say that nationalism, xenophobia, is not just a terrible thing; it's a disease, because you can't get rid of it. You can see an example why. In my opinion, there's some metaphysics about this, because such self-revealing actions and Munich Security Conference that took place in February 2025, all those tears and cries against each other, you can't come up with it. They are defeated by their own ideology. I would say it like this, because this ideology is destructive. They thought that they're going to destroy us, but they destroyed themselves. But we're not guilty in it, because we talked about it many times to them. We proposed them to sober up and to go back to mutually respectful relations, to mutual beneficial cooperation, to build common Europe. We proposed we use all the benefits from our geography and history and go to the emergence of a large-scale Eurasian space, but they chose otherwise. Thank you very much. And another question, if I may, about the Munich conference, and one more participant of it. Vladimir Zelensky, during his interview to the NBC News TV channel, said about a larger conflict on the territory of Europe as soon as the summer, with participation of Russia. He mentioned Lithuania and Poland. How can you respond to such statements? One more time. Did you say Lithuania and Poland statements? On February 17th, Vladimir Zelensky, during an interview to the NBC News TV channel, said about a larger armed conflict on the territory of Europe this summer, and said that Lithuania and Poland can become the probable territories for this. Probably Vladimir Zelensky, this head of a terrorist organization and junta, probably he has plans to either attack the neighboring countries, the countries of the EU, or plans to organized terror attacks on their territories. Probably he talked about that. We warned many times that he and the Kiev regime turned into a terrorist unit, including an international one, given the number of international mercenaries and international armaments that they receive. Probably he wants to hit the founding fathers of this unconstitutional community on the territory of Ukraine. We talked about it many times. Probably he just warns them that he is going to commit acts of aggression against them. It's a classic story when the West first create monsters and think that it's going to guide them for their own purposes, and then these monsters hit back. There have been a lot of examples. Probably we have to specify what he meant, and probably they have to think what he meant. And he unequivocally said that he was prepared to use radical measures to achieve his ambitions. We talked that the strikes on the facilities of critical infrastructure like Zaporozhye NPP, or attempts to use them to put pressure on the European leaders. It was not just words. It's a signal that they radicalized to such an extent that they are in some space of nihilism, that we can expect anything from them. But it's not only our analysis. We are absolutely, we're really glad that all our analyses are confirmed by facts. But the Kiev regime says that by themselves. So let's move on. Is author E with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We were shocked by the arrest of Alexander Gapunenko following his participation in the conference dedicated to the ethnic genocide of the Russian-speaking population as a factor of preparation to the war with Russia. And the Latvian security services thought that this is an issue of national security, and so it happened. How can you comment on this? Is it a message to Moscow that, like, what are you going to do to us? Or is it a signal to Trump himself that the local special securities show who really control political processes in the region? I didn't hear clearly what you said, and I'll try to answer your question. As to the arrest of a scientist, Alexander Gapunenko, in Riga, it is yet another action of the Russophobe regime in Latvia to intimidate the Russian-speaking population. Recently, Alexander Gapunenko was arrested. This was done under the pretexts he said about the sad realities in Latvia, and the authorities commit terror against this ethnic group of people, against Russians, I mean. And he only confirmed in his statement the evaluations that were given earlier by the relevant international organizations about the sad situation with human rights and rights of minorities in the modern Latvia. and this political regime and not law enforcers, because they only follow orders. It is enough just to give a speech at the round table to have a criminal case against you under 2 articles. So we can say that here Latvia violates the international agreements, including the Pact on the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedom, as well as their commitments within the OSCE. We'll follow the situation with him. We'll do everything we can to protect his rights. So we'll draw attention to what is going on, because it's a real crime against human rights. In pursuit of liberty, human rights, Latvia turned into a place where they are not respected. Is Almayadin with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon. Israel warned to take down an Iranian civil airplane that flew to Lebanon. It caused chaos in the airport of Beirut. How do you evaluate this act of aggression? And now, according to the information available, recently in the international airport Hariri in Beirut, there were cases of aggressive acts between individuals with security forces, including the Lebanese army, on February 14. Following unrest, there were 2 people wounded. The president of the country condemned this situation. From our side, we think that what's going on in the Lebanon is an issue of the internal issue, and we call on all the leaders to try and settle the issues and differences of the national agenda in the legal framework through the search of acceptable compromises and not resort to violence. It is vital not to let the stabilization of Lebanon at the current difficult stage to preserve their political unity and to ensure the sustainable trajectory of this country. Thank you very much. Is the Moscow Post with us? Yes, we have one question today. The Trump administration and Russia started a constructive dialogue at the high level. Are there shifts in terms of less pressure on our diplomats in the U.S.? They had a lot of obstacles earlier. With the beginning of the constructive dialogue, you ask about shifts. It's only started. There was an impetus by the leaders of both countries. But right now in Riyadh, the sides work and the delegation discuss the whole set of issues, and imagine how many of them we have. There have been no contacts because of the previous Biden administration, and they have accumulated over the years, even before that. So we started the work. But how this conversation started, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will tell more about it following the negotiations. He is the voice of the fatherland with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have the following question. We're talking about crimes of neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Probably it's time to say directly that those are crimes of the U.S. in Ukraine. I think that the White House even started to talk about it. We always stressed that those who created and established the Kiev regime, who sponsored them, who supplied them with armaments, who were accomplices of the terror attacks, and I have no other words to describe what happened. And I'm talking not only about briefings, but all our statements, all the interviews of the leadership of the country, of the MFA, of our relevant experts, talked about the essence of what was going on, with facts and figures, and paid special attention to that. Can the change of the narrative of the US be a new performance to deceive our country? How can we protect from that? We can be protected from that like this. We know our national interest and to work professionally to implement them.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much. On that note, I would like to tell you goodbye, and we're looking forward to getting some